Vince Dunn stood up for his teammates, but did it cost him a healthy start to the season?
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Seattle hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, fresh off of my plane in from Pittsburgh. And I am your host of Locked On Kraken, also a contributor to CBS Sports. I was at 810 Media Day doing some package interviews for that. Also an accredited media member for Milano Cortina. Well, I will be covering any Kraken past, present, or future that make an Olympic roster. On today's show, we're going to talk about injuries. We're also going to talk a little bit about where this team stands, where are the final evaluations, and where do players like Berkeley Catton, Ty Cartier come into play. If you are on our audio only bonus episode, I talked about Melanson, we talked about Jugnoth, players that have already been reallocated. But what about Oscar Fisker Molgaard? You know, I've been high on him. We've talked about him on the show before. So a lots to get into as we get ready for the turn of a new page. October is here, or almost here, and the Seattle Kraken definitely have some questions they need to answer. So let's start with the injury updates. I mentioned at the top of the show that Vince Dunn, goes down with an injury for sticking up for his teammates, his players, and some of that, getting his lick back. And that was in the game against Calgary. Also, apologies. I was expecting to go live post game. I was waiting for the upload for Lane Lambert's media availability. It never came, or it didn't come before I needed to turn in on the East Coast, knowing I was coming back to the West Coast. So apologies, but I believe I said this on the live stream pregame. We are going to be incorporating more live streams on Locked On Kraken, and we will have a schedule. Some of that where I just want to get Joe Dabney back on board when she's ready to come back on board so we can schedule those things, but more to come there. So against the Calgary Flames, the Seattle Kraken fall in a shootout. We got to see Philip Grubauer in net there. Berkeley Catton scored. But again, unfortunately, an injury to Vince Dunn. Now, Papasil, big name. They talked about it on the broadcast, on the TV broadcast. Just someone who has been an agitator for sure. Vince Dunn gets a roughing penalty, and then he leaves down the tunnel. We heard from Lane Lambert that he is day-to-day. So he adds, I have my handy dandy notebook. Vince Dunn is now added to a list of McCann and Brandon Montour. We're hearing that Canner and Monty are expected to be ready for opening night. Chandler Stevenson, aka Stevie, is working towards being ready for opening night. Capo Caco, upper body injury, out for about 6 weeks and will be evaluated at that time. And Vince Dunn considered day to day. Those are some heavy hitters, especially because I like what Capo has been able to do with Newman and Beniers. I like that line. We've seen Eberle hop on that line. In the preseason, we saw Catton hop on that line, and Lane Lambert has continued to say that we'll probably see at least 2 players from what he expects to be his line combinations. And that third position, in this case, I thought it was Catton on that top line, as someone being evaluated. And we'll talk throughout today's episode on what are the evaluations. But when you have injuries like McCann, Montour, Stevenson, Dunn, not only is that a lot of money, but that's a lot of experience. And maybe not the end of the world to start the season like that. But this season we know is super tight. I love this graphic for those watching on YouTube. It's not easy to read, but we've talked about this. Lots of back-to-backs here, a condensed schedule, not a lot of breaks. I know that Allison and Piper talked about that during one of the intermissions on the game the other night. So this is going to be some adversity. We knew that coming into this season. What is there to prove for this Kraken team? It almost seems like everything and nothing all at the same time. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. But when you don't have these guys ready, and, you know, Lane Lambert was asked, is this team on schedule? Are they delivering as promised? And he used the term that we're fairly on schedule, but he's been open about the injuries have been a lot. And we've talked about this before, even last year with Dan Bilesma, who I think really tried to attack preseason and get the guys, get their lungs open. I love seeing that. And I think Lane Lambert wants that from this team. Do the injuries suggest that that is a bad plan? My response would be no. You need to be game fit. And the teams that are game fit to start the season, they get a good jump to the season. Now, is there data that suggests, or has there been a study done about coming out of the gate maybe too strong and not having anything to work up to? I could see that logic. I think that's a conversation that's interesting to have. With the case of Vince Dunn, well, first of all, I'll say this: I don't know exactly when he was injured, because it seemed like after the brush up with Papasil, he was ready to go. Well, he was also in the penalty box, but he wasn't able to return fully. I mean, you know how I feel if you listen, my everydayers, my OGers, you know how I feel about hockey fights. I don't mind aggression. I don't even mind getting in some guy's face every once in a while, but dropping the gloves and fighting, dropping someone to the ice, you falling to the ice, bare hands, I don't like it. It's just, and again, if he got injured in this way, I don't know. That being said, taking away the actual punching that sometimes happens in hockey fights, because I just think you're really putting your freaking hands in a bad situation there. But anyway, aside from that, I do like that Vince stood up for his team. It's just that now this team is in an interesting place when it comes to injuries. So how is that going to work out? But the injuries perhaps emphasize and underscore what I've been talking about. The new threats, the young blood, the youths. Can they find a way onto this roster? And I tell you what, there are some that are knocking on the door. Again, a bonus episode, a little bit of extra content that we put out on audio only. We'll upload it on YouTube eventually. But I think there are, and especially with Stevenson, that was my big question. What do we do with Stevenson if Shane Wright wants more time? If Molgard can make this team, what does that look like? Gaudreau's making a case. So again, I know I talked about it a little bit yesterday on Monday's episode, but let's talk about it again. What are these final evaluations going to look like? What is Lane Lambert looking for? What am I looking for? We'll get into that coming up on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. We know that it is the NFL season, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first $5 bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can use it for parlays, player props. You can follow live during the game, look at futures props. Whether a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel has something for you. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app and get started. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination, your first listen, your midday listen, your late night listen. Either way, we appreciate you. Also, apologies in advance. The airplane was so cold. It was frigid, and I caught the sniffles. So apologies in advance if I sound a little stuffy, but I should be on the up and up, hopefully by tomorrow. I'm very sensitive to my respiratory system is very sensitive to kind of stale air and cold air. Anyway, I don't know what that has to do with the Kraken, except for my voice isn't exactly where I want it to be. This Kraken team, there are some guys that are being evaluated, and one is a veteran, and we got to talk about it. Lane Lambert talked earlier today on Tuesday about Philip Grubauer, and we haven't really seen, other than Joey Decord, too much time for Murray or Grubauer, but that's where the competition lies as far as who we will see backstop um, Joy Decord. I have to be honest, and we've talked about this before. Philip Grubauer, I mean, you lose a game in a shootout, not the end of the world. Lane also talked just about some of the details that didn't work in transition, things of that nature in this game. But Philip Grubauer on the glove side is a problem. Calgary picked his pocket there. And if his positioning isn't right and he can't shade or kind of nudge a puck with his shoulder and cut off angles, then that's going to be a problem. I need to look back at Murray's game. I know he felt he was knocking off some rust. The Kraken didn't win that game, but that's not, necessarily indicative. I need to do a little more recon. Another question that was asked is with Joey included, when you have the goalies splitting games, how do you evaluate them? Lane Lambert kind of talked about using everything, which would include practices, I'm sure conversations, things of that, training sessions to evaluate. I think it's going to be interesting. And I don't think it's a guarantee that Philip Grubauer on any given night is the backup goaltender for Joey Decord. That being said, I've said this before, Joey needs rest. And it's a condensed schedule, back-to-backs we've talked about. It's an Olympic year, so that's why the condensed schedule, not as much recovery in between games. And for a West Coast team, that is something that is going to be a factor. So as much as I'm not sure that Grubauer in particular has proved that he's a backstop or deserving necessarily of extra starts, I think you're going to need him. So how do you balance that? What is the line of differentiation between getting someone ready to perform at their peak, but knowing that what they're able to give might not put the team holistically where they want to be? And so again, I'm an eye test person. For those who know, I want to be able to take a look back at Murray's game a little bit. I'm back in Seattle after being in Pittsburgh for A10 Media Day with CBS Sports, so I'll be able to focus on that a little bit more. I know I'm not traveling for the finals. Whoa, crazy overtime game 5 between the Aces and Indiana. Whew, the Indiana Fever give me hope that the Kraken can overcome these injuries. But the evaluation, I've been talking about the evaluation from the goaltending because we haven't talked about that much in this preseason. But I think that someone else that was talked about, we are going to talk about Catton again, but someone else that was mentioned was Ty Cartier. And I think I talked about this a few episodes ago. I didn't like Cart's at his performance in his first preseason game. I thought he did much better. And the terminology that Lane Lambert used to describe, he was asked about Cartier. He didn't mention him on his own. It was asked specifically about Cartier, but he mentioned that he seemed, quote, more engaged. And I think that's a good way of putting it. I might say he seemed more sure of himself. He seemed like he knew what he was doing. And maybe that's a little bit of rust. Maybe it's the combinations he felt a little more comfortable with. Maybe it's that he's like, I got to step my game up, having conversations, see what was happening in training camp. But I do think Cartier, as we've gotten closer to the start of the regular season, has looked more confident. And with the injuries and with, maybe considering some young threats, I think Cartier has to continue on that trajectory to find himself getting significant, likely fourth line minutes. I know I've talked before about Cartier. I could see being a bubble guy, but from how I've interpreted what Lane Lambert says, I think he likes Cartier's game. I think he also wants to see more of it. And I think that's fair. I think that is more than fair. And Cartier's been in the game for a little bit. His path to the NHL, to pro hockey overall, is a winding road, which makes me want to root for him. I love his story, and I think he has to continue on. There was a little bit of a plateau at the end of last season. And he's someone I might want to talk to when we get some time with the players in the next few days. Morning skate tomorrow at CPA, so I'm excited for that. I was staying up in Northgate area, and now I'm closer to to CPA, and the Kraken are going to be having morning skates at Climate Pledge Arena. So this kind of works out for me. I'm in the Queen Anne area, staying with some friends and another pupper I have to show you probably on the stream in the next few days. But Cartier is someone that I think is going to be interesting to see where he lands. And then, of course, there's Berkeley Catton. He scored lone goal in regulation. Just an aside, we have to be better on shootouts. We have to be better on shootouts. And the confidence, I don't like talking about athletes and their confidence. If you're an everydayer, you know that. I don't throw that around lightly. I don't think it's fair to assume someone else's confidence or lack thereof within the context of talking about sports. I just think that's a dangerous slope. And maybe it's talking in the realm of confidence or being a little more creative. I don't know, but the shootout attempts didn't look great. And honestly, I've been at training camp. I've been at practices and sessions, and shootouts haven't really been a part of the sessions that I've seen. And I think that is likely going to change, or at least that's what I would do if I were on the staff, is focus on that. Another focus we know is special teams. And, that's also, I think, going to be an equalizer, or I should say, if all things are equal, that will be the separation, is what I'm trying to say, between players who are maybe being considered. Is Berkeley Catton one of those players? I think he is. I still think it's a long shot, because with Catton, we know we can't send him to the AHL, which makes the most sense. So if we want him available at any time this season, he has to make the NHL roster, or else he has to go back to juniors at 19 years old. Do these injuries help out? Does he get a situation where it's 6-10 games, something like that, where he can stay in the NHL? That seems likely, especially with the injuries. I think they can kind of milk it a little bit. And I think there's a world in which he does enough in that time to earn himself a spot, but there is definitely competition. Not the end of the world if he doesn't make the NHL this season, but let me know your thoughts on Catton in particular. Coming up next, I actually talked about Catton and Cartier already, but, let's talk a little bit about, what the next few days will look like, and what we heard from Lane Lambert about how he's going to utilize this time where they are able to really get after it in practice, just because of how the schedule plays out. We'll talk about that coming up on Locked On Kraken. Thanks again for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination, for making us your first listen of the day, your midday listen, your late night listen. And again, apologies if I'm a little stuffy, the joys of travel, but I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be back in Seattle. Had a great time in Pittsburgh, and can't wait for you to see some of the interviews that I did. We did, I don't know, almost 30 interviews today for A10 basketball, women's basketball. And those will air on CBS Sports Network throughout the year, mostly in 2026 portion of the season. But I will tell you a little bit more about that when they're available if you want to check it out. But we're talking about the Kraken, of course. And coming up, I talked about there is a morning skate. That's because there's another and the final. I kept getting confused. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's the final preseason game. It is. The Kraken are hosting the Oilers. Another good test here. I know if you listen to the bonus episode that was on audio only, Jugnoff talking about, it was Jugnoff talking about being able to stop a breakaway from two of the heavy hitters from the Edmonton Oilers and getting texts about it. And that was a really fun moment for him. Great kind of welcome to the pros moment as well. So I'm looking forward to see how a team or a roster that's much closer to a opening day roster is going to perform, because I'm sure it will be the same on the other side with Edmonton. So I will be at that game, morning skate at CPA. I'll be there for that. And then the Kraken are taking some days off. So Thursday and Friday they will have off, and then they hit the ice again for Saturday. I mentioned this beautiful graphic that, again, is not always easy to read, but I will read it out to you, and that's also for my audio only folks. But there is a significant amount of time. There's 7 full days between this preseason game and the home opener against Anaheim. So it's Anaheim, and then the Vegas Golden Knights, and then the Seattle Kraken will hit the road for 3 games before coming back for 2 at CPA. There's one back-to-back. It's Philadelphia, Washington on the road. Everything else, at least one game, or excuse me, one off day in between. Some we'll have to travel, but the biggest travel is from going to Toronto to then Philly with just one day. And then you go from Winnipeg to home to then play Edmonton 2 days, and then you have Montreal to close out October. I think the time off signals to me just how beat up this team could be. I think it also signals to me that Lane understands that he's worked this team. I think some of that also is just for this evaluation, so that the team can figure out who is on this team, have some conversations. Maybe they, or the staff, I should say, is able to use that time, not having to schedule practices and training sessions, to really have some conversations as a staff and figure some things out, what they want to do. Lane was asked if he expects to go down to the wire and really utilize and expire all of the time he can before having to dwindle down the roster. At this point, that just seems the prudent thing to do with all of the injuries. Again, I talked about that in the first segment, but I'll go over it again. Excuse me. McCann and Montour are out day to day technically, but are expected to be back for that home game against Anaheim. You've got Chandler Stevenson, that is, I think, still they're using the term day to day, but he seems less likely to make the return in time for the home opener. Then you have Capo Caco, upper body injury. We're looking at 6 weeks there. And Vince Dunn is the newest Kraken to join the day-to-day club. So, yeah, it's a broken hand for Capo Caco. That's exactly what it looked like. 6 weeks out. That one's tough because I thought Capo Caco with Newman and Beniers was looking really solid, but it's a next player up mentality. We heard that from Lane Lambert, but this evaluation is going to be serious, and I think it's going to set the tone also for how this Kraken can handle adversity early on. I think it goes into our vets versus new threats. Now, I was thinking about more organic competition. You never like to factor in injuries if you don't have to, but injuries are a part of the narrative and the story, at least for now. So I think the Kraken have some decisions to make, including if we do see Berkeley Catton stick around. Do we see him as a centerman, knowing Stevie might be out? Do we see him on the wing, knowing a player like Capo Caco is going to be out, and McCann maybe is working his way back? What does that mean on the blue line? Rutger Evans, I'm not hating what I'm seeing. I'm not overly loving what I'm seeing. I think best it's neutral. But if you got Vince Dunn out of the mix for longer than day to day, what is that going to look like? And that impacts special teams. That's something else Lane talked to us today about. When you have both Dunn and Monty out, not to mention, Capo Caco, could he be someone that we see on special teams, mostly the power play? What does that do for that Beniers line? But specifically thinking about your power play, Vince Dunn and Brandon Montour, we've seen them be on the power play at the same time. in last year's season. Now, is that going to work? Well, we don't even know because we haven't seen Monty on the ice at all. And now Dunn is out, perhaps while Monty is making his way back. Lots of questions. I don't feel supremely confident, but I didn't for most of the offseason. I think I'm just waiting to see how it all unfolds. But let me know what are some of the biggest questions you have about the Kraken as we get started for the season. Again, I'll be hanging out with the team tomorrow, morning skate and the game. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Try to get some time with Ty Cartier just to see how he's feeling about things, etc., etc. A reminder to be kind to yourself. So hopefully you can extend that kindness to others. Please do hold fast, stay true, loud and proud. We say, let's go Kraken. And hey, let's go Mariners as well. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.